Hey guys, this is your High Fist here with another juicy video as always. Firstly, thank you to Steven Erickson for commenting on the last video. I urge all of you to read the video as always, right? He left behind a lot of useful and interesting information there, right? The inspiration for the scene that I did a video on, the inspiration for Quick Ben, right? He left some of his thoughts on Crackpot Trail. So as usual, his comment was a lot of fun to read, and I pinned it. So help yourselves there. What I thought it would be it would be fun to touch on today, and this is going to be a very short and quick video, is the alternatives to written history that we see in the Malazan series, which I've always found pretty cool, right? Because throughout the series, we see plenty of instances of historical information being recorded and transmitted in things other than a written form. And of course, in today's day and age, that often seems to be a pretty astounding thing, since almost all of knowledge and all of history in the modern world is transmitted through the written word. Let me just give you a few examples that we can see in the books that I can just think of off the top of my head. The most memorable one that comes to my mind is the use of an oral map by Mapo in Deadhouse Gates. I think it's like an abandoned city or kingdom or something that's lost in time, that Mapo and Icarium and Fiddler and all that encounter. And Mapo just explores the city because of the oral tradition that he has, as in he knows the Trell tribe that Mapo's from. They've abandoned the written word and they've kind of decided to go with non-written traditions of history. So in the lyrics of a song or poem that Mapo knows by heart are is the layout of the entire city, right? How many roads there are, how do you get from point A to point B? And simply by using the song, by using this oral tradition, this oral map, Mapo is able to navigate through an entire city, which I always found so cool, because this is not the type of stuff which we would get in a normal work of fantasy, right? This can only be done by somebody who's put in a lot of thought into the various ways in which many different cultures and races and tribes would choose to kind of record and transmit information. It's important because if you think about it, almost all the major races in the Malazan world are victims of history, right? The Barghast and the Toblakai, for instance, have forgotten their own history and have therefore kind of stagnated into this sense of stillness, right? They've become like mud in a sense. The Jagut are victims of their own history in the sense of what their own members have done in the past, and of course their major war on death and things like that. The Aimas are victims of history in the sense that they've sacrificed the future in order to avenge the past. They've kind of given up on the existence of their own race in order to avenge the injustices that were done to them by the tyrants. The Folkrulasail, right, the Kachen Chamal, they're all in their own ways, as you know, victims of their own history, right? So that sense of history is always there, and everybody knows about the unreliable narrator and things like that, right? The entire series plays around with the concept of history a lot, and the fact that there's a lot of non-written historical methods like this, intellectual methods like this, makes it all the more interesting. Another example I can think of is the use of tracking lineages and information through the form of tattoos, like trots of the bridge burners. If you remember in Memories of Ice, when the Malazans encounter the Barghast, Trots has to fight the Barghast chief's son in a duel, because the tattoos kind of reveal him to be even more pure-blooded than the tribes there. So more than Hetan's father, Hetan's brothers, and all of that, right? So the intricate tattoos that have been carved all over Trots's body are not just kind of tribal tattoos and forms of identity. They also tell a very intricate stories of who his ancestors are, where they went, how exactly they came together, blah, blah, blah. And even though this is not an oral tradition, it's still, in my opinion, a really cool sort of alternative way of storing and passing on knowledge and history. Another example I can think of, and this is a clear sort of way in which the two traditions are contrasted, are the Teest Idur, right? Where there's one general Teest Idur history, and then there's another Teest Idur history that only the women know. So Trull is told, I think it's in Midnight Tide, no, either Midnight Tides or Bone Hunters, right? Where he's told, listen, the histories you were taught is a lie, right? Where Scandabari is the actual traitor. He's not the sort of the one who committed the noble sacrifice against whom betrayal was the answer. He was the betrayer. So what this scene tells me is that the Idur are taught history because Trull is told that histories you were taught are all wrong, right? And that's the written tradition that they have. But then there's the secret oral tradition of history that they have, which the Teest Idur women have, where they know what the truth is. They know that Blood Eye was indeed the betrayer and not the other way around. And I thought this was a pretty cool juxtaposition once again, right, of the inconsistencies in history. So I don't really want to go into that rabbit hole because, as you know, if we were to do a full comprehensive video on the use of history and historians and all that in the 10 big books, that would require a collection of videos and a lot more research, right, than just a quick impromptu rant like this. So what else can we think of? The role of sort of tapestries, right? The folklore assail use tapestries, although as I pointed out in my video on the folklore assail, even in those tapestries, they have their own faces blurred out because that's the kind of the diametric opposite of preserving memory and history. But a more important one would be the tapestry we see in either Midnight Tides or Reaper's Gale. It could be Reaper's Gale, right? In the sort of Blue Rose sort of settlement where we see these huge tapestries that tell the story of Rake and his brothers and Mother Dark, and from one end to another, it's all just intricately carved there, the entire history of the early Teestandi, which is once again an alternative to the sort of written form. I'm of course not going into the sort of supernatural bits. There are sort of supernatural magical ways in which you can transmit knowledge about the past as well. So for example, there are some warrants that are a memory and some warrants that can kind of give you a glimpse back in time, kind of like what Osirk and Lorik do. And there are sort of some other realms like the Refugium, for example, right, where it's not just the people who are living there, but the environment around them itself. It's kind of a remnant of the past. In book 7, when Quick Ben enters the Refugium with Ondrak and Trull, he learns so much, and we learn so much about not just how the Aimas used to live, but about the environment around them, the hunting practices, right, the predators, the prey, and all that. It was all just so fascinating. But those would all be supernatural ways of learning about the past, right? So in this video, I just wanted to touch on some of the natural ways, right? So tapestries, tattoos, songs, right? All these oral maps and things like that. And I've always found that very, very fascinating. Look at Toll the Hounds, right? The way that a Krupp, however you want to say it, narrates most of that story, right? And we don't really know which part is exaggerated, which part is not, and all that. And it's all done in the form of a sort of song and dance by the fire, right? Almost the whole of the 8th book is some oily, obese guy doing a song and dance, right? And we are essentially left scratching our heads, and we need to decode what exactly happened and what exactly didn't. There's once again the meta element of the entire series itself being the Book of the Fallen, but maybe it's a physical book. Maybe these 10 books are what the crippled god writes, but we never really know. For all we know, the kind of chronicling that the crippled god wants to do might be much more of an oral tradition thing once again, right? I mean, the two Hindu epics that I always quote, right? The Mahabharata and the Ramayana, they're both epics that for thousands of years have been passed down from one generation to another in the oral tradition, right? It's only in recent times that the written version has become the norm. For many thousands of years of Hindu tradition, it's been the sort of the oral sort of method is what is used in terms of kind of making sure that each generation knows these myths, and that each kind of generation makes sure that they memorize, and there are people whose entire lives are dedicated towards these, whose lives are dedicated towards memorizing these things. And that's how many of these traditions keep going on and on. And I think there's a very interesting point, because in the modern way in which we understand knowledge, it's almost taken for granted that the written word is the most reliable form of transmitting information. Even if you look at whatever modern medicine, modern astronomy, modern engineering, language, especially history, right? It's taken for granted. If you just look at history, right, it's taken for granted in almost all circles that written history is somehow more reliable than oral history, that written history is somehow more invulnerable and resistant to tampering than non-written history, which is not the case at all. In fact, you will find that in many ways, non-written history can be just as resilient, if not even more resilient, than written history, if you just do it right. There are many conversations in the 10 big books about the unreliability of history, particularly of written history. The most memorable one I can remember is from, I think it's Toll the Hounds, where Baruch and Crone have this conversation, and Baruch is reading these texts that Anamander Rake has recovered from Moonspawn, and he's like, and these texts talk about the old ascendants and elder gods and things like that, and he's like, but all of this is so inconsistent, right? All of these have so many claims and so many stories, and they're all inconsistent. Much like you could argue the actual 10 books as well. And Crone just laughs, and she's like, but that's what you get with written history, right? That's the nature of written history. Written history will always be unreliable and tampered and all that. A good example of that, probably our final example, would be the Kachen Jamal with their scents and their oils and things like that. The Shigal assassin, Gurul, even says that this tendency to rewrite history that other races have will never happen with the Kachen Jamal, because they record and transmit history through oils and scents and the flavors of those secretions, right? I mean, listen, they're a reptilian race, so we don't really know how that works and all that, but that's a small bit that we get. So each matron, through these flavors and scents, passes down the memories of the matrons before her in a direct line, right? So every new matron will know exactly what the history of the entire lineage before her was. And this in many ways is troublesome as well, because this vast knowledge of history also makes them see the inevitability of the destruction of their own civilization, of their own race. And it's even mentioned that because of this, all Kachen Jamal matrons are destined to go mad. They're all destined to go insane from the burden of this history, from the burden of all these memories, right? So these were all the alternatives that I can think of the top of my head, right? Barring dreams and the refugium and things like that. So we've seen it being done through songs and oral maps, tattoos, tapestries, right? Scents and oils. It's sometimes done through songs. Some of these tribes also have a very unique way of understanding the past as well. I think I mentioned the Anibar and the way in which they have this water, ice, sort of vapor, almost metaphor, right? Where they understand the past as the frozen time, they understand the present as the flowing time, and they understand the future as the unfound time. So various sort of cultures and civilizations have their own understanding of history and the passing of knowledge. And this is not something that I think you will find very often in other works of fantasy, because it requires somebody to have actually sat down and sort of the author must have the ability to not just understand the ways in which different cultures can sort of do these things differently, but must also have an appreciation for how intelligent and clever they are, for him to be able to kind of replicate that in an authentic way in the books, right? So once again, this was just a quick video, guys. It was just something I thought I could do a quick rant on. I hope you guys found that interesting. So thank you. See you guys next time. Take care.